retail. That's the biggest advertising category, as we've already heard. There's a lot of pressure on that retail advertising, and a lot of things are happening there where retailers are consolidating, retailers are going out of business. Federated is owning everything, and pretty soon you're not going to have a department store brand. It's just going to be department store. I mean, right now everything's Macy's, but pretty soon it's just going to be generic department store. So that's a big problem for newspapers because their traditional advertising base is eroding. And then nearly 40% of that revenue comes from classified advertising. And classified advertising has been the growth, the one area that's been growing for newspapers. One of the reasons why McClatchy, who just recently bought Knight Ridder, is selling the San Jose Mercury News is because during the boom years of the Internet in Silicon Valley, the San Jose Mercury News's help-wanted classified advertising was just huge. Now it's tiny, and it's in a slow-growth market. And so here's a paper that was so successful just a few years ago that McClatchy is getting rid of because it doesn't fit into their growth market plan. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the Internet has really been digging into this classified revenue for newspapers. I mean, just imagine Craigslist. I mean, you could sell your car on Craigslist for free, right? So why would you buy a classified ad in the Austin American Statesman? The folks here from the Statesman, though, I want you to all know that classified in print works. People should buy it. They should use it. I just wasn't trying to, badmouth you. You all are my clients, so I have to treat you well. But the point is, when 40% of the revenue is coming from classified, when classified competitors on the Internet start taking small pieces away of that revenue, you could see the large impact it has on a newspaper and its revenue. I just want to end with some things to think about, because I think what we heard in our keynote presentation this morning is that there's a lot of bad news out there. I think there's some good news out there too, but let's just some things to consider. And these are all things that have just happened within the last few months. The McClatchy company buys Knight Ridder for $4.5 billion. Okay, and that included 32 daily newspapers and a sizable number of Internet businesses. In 1998, which was not that long ago, McClatchy bought the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, one newspaper, for $1.4 billion. Okay, granted, at that time, people thought McClatchy paid too much for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, but I think it's pretty clear that the Knight Ridder sale was a fire sale. I mean, McClatchy got Knight Ridder for a very small, relatively small amount of money. All right, the Washington Post recently announced that they're cutting 80 editorial jobs. That's 9% of their newsroom due to pressures on advertising and circulation. Get ratings for the New York Times Company, Tribune Company, and Scripps have been put under review by Moody's Investor Service with an eye to downgrades. And Merrill Lynch just the other day downgraded Dow Jones from neutral to sell on fears of slower than anticipated revenue growth at their flagship, the Wall Street Journal. Block Communications, owner of the Toledo Blade and Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, will close its 5-person D.C. bureau, which has operated out of the National Press Building since 1927. And in September, the E.W. Scripps-owned Cincinnati Enquirer gave buyouts to 15 editorial staffers, decreasing their newsroom from 80 to its current 65. Buyouts are still being offered, so if another 5 take it, that would mean a 25% reduction in staff since last fall. Okay, if we're talking about quality journalism, all of these things have an impact, obviously, on quality journalism. But on the other side of the coin, the New York Times launched Times Select, which is providing access to specific content for a fee, $50 a year. You get to read Maureen Dowd online, and it's free to print subscribers. And it boasts about they boasted about 135,000 paid subscribers in the first 2 months of Times Select. The St. Petersburg Times has begun offering free private party classified ads. Individuals can sell personal merchandise through free ads online and in print, and ads may be renewed one time for free, and sellers can purchase upgrades to enhance their ads, upgrades like color or bolded type, things of that nature. But this is a radical change for a newspaper to be giving away classified ads. The Associated Press and MSN just recently launched the AP Online Video Network, providing 40 video clips per day covering national, international, technology, business, and entertainment news that their subscribers could use on their websites. U.S. newspapers are beginning to introduce podcasting and vodcast, I hope it's pronounced vodcasting, to reach young people through digital channels. The Newspaper Association of America reported that total newspaper advertising revenue grew 1.4% in the fourth quarter of 2005, largely due to spending online. Print advertising was up a scant 0.4% in that period, but online advertising was up 32.5%. So all of the growth is coming from online advertising. And at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, New York Times Company chairman and publisher Arthur Sulzberger Jr. said that their online product, NewYorkTimes.com, has moved from being an ancillary product to being a core product for the company. So when they talk about core, they're not just talking about the printed New York Times, they're talking about NewYorkTimes.com. So I think you could see that there's definitely a sea change going on in what's happening in terms of the way newspapers are bringing news to the public. What does this mean for quality journalism? Will newspapers be able to figure out the right economic model to fund these large news gathering and editing organizations when the revenues are going to be so much smaller? I don't have the answer to that. If I did, I would be much more sought after than I currently am. So I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer questions after the next presentation.
Tell us where all this money is going to come from, the fund quality journalism.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's the question. Will the online news industry be able to finance quality journalism? And I apologize for the slide. It's a horrible one to show at a college. It's very politically incorrect. But there was a time not so long ago when some of us, and I know some of the people in the room are old enough, when we actually looked like this, wore these clothes, and had our sideburns that length. So, forgive me, I think it's the only politically incorrect one I'm going to have. So the question is, are we winning? Are we on target to generating enough money to sustain quality journalism if print goes down and online goes up? And actually, that big ship there, I should say that, actually it's a battleship. What I'm going to give you data for and what I'm going to be talking about is not so much the national newspapers. The New York Times, for instance, is in a class by itself, being more of a national newspaper. Because in the U.S., there's only, I think, as I recollect, about 15 newspapers that have more than 250,000 daily circulation. The other 1,476 have less than that, and so this is really going to apply more to the smaller papers. But then, of course, that's where most newspapers are in most circulation. Well, the good thing is that there's a whole sea of money out there, and newspapers are getting it. Probably getting a lot more than people think. There's still some people who think, well, are these sites profitable? And I was skeptical in articles I was writing for a long time, but yes, they are actually generating a lot of revenue, more than most people think overall. I should probably tell you where I'm getting my figures from. My company represents Burrell Associates overseas. Burrell, like Scarborough, is a research company that specializes, in this case, in online. If Scarborough is doing print and is the rating center for print, Burrell is the one who's keeping track of online news expenditures. A variety of companies that you'll see here, and I'm going to move through these slides fairly quickly in the interest of time. But what we've got is data from local ad spending in pretty well every major U.S. market, of which I mean about 250 markets. Online spending, where we actually go into the sites, newspapers, TV, pure play, and ask them confidentially how much money they're making. And we also talk to local advertising experts in those areas. Because a lot of the figures you're seeing in the press, I think the NAA one, what was it, 2-point-something or other billion, they believe, that newspapers, we're actually showing a lot more. If you look at the small 10,000 circulation dailies who actually are making money and add that in, because there are so many of them, it's actually a higher figure. I'll give you those in a minute, but I want to show you the ad share chart a little bit in terms of where this is going. And this is a little wider scale than the 98 to 2005 that Gary just showed. This is ad share, and again, not round dollar numbers as Professor Picard mentioned, but ad share itself of the industry over the last 60 years. Newspapers is that declining, slowly declining line, obviously, on top, and we are still, in the newspaper industry, the dominant advertising medium in most markets. Broadcast TV came up in the 50s, peaked sometimes in the 80s, and still has a fair share, particularly of national advertising, but it's left the newspapers, and it's also declining. Radio, which is our oldest competitor probably in the newspaper business, you can tell I'm from the newspaper business, 10 cent power, is pretty well flat in terms of its ad share. Cable TV, which came up in the 80s, has done pretty well and is pretty well equaled, at least in the U.S., the market share in advertising for radio. Here, however, is the Internet, which started more or less in 97 or 96 when the first banner ads were put online. And look at the slope. Look at how that's going up. It's a particularly strong climb, and you'll notice it's starting to intersect some of the other media. And what we found in adding the figures together, not just for newspapers, but all online media, and this is research from other companies we're aggregating here, is that in the U.S., about $17 billion in revenue is generated from online advertising. Now, put that in perspective. The entire newspaper industry is about $44 billion in revenue. That's a sizable number. It surpassed the amount of money spent on Yellow Pages advertising. Online has actually surpassed that. It will surpass radio advertising revenues in this country sometime in the next 18 months, and it already has in the UK. It's actually bigger online in the UK than radio is in terms of the amount of money. And it's already surpassed billboard advertising here in the US. And it has surpassed magazine advertising in the US. The magazine industry generates about $16 billion a year. There's $17 billion now online. A lot more money than you'd think. These are the relative shares. We've been able to track about $3.8 billion in newspaper revenue that's coming from online in the United States among the 1,500 papers. Total share is about 22%. The local share, again, it's the dominant medium, local is 41%. And you can see the other figures here. Other print magazines, et cetera, about a little under 400 million. TV, 2.2 billion, 14% overall, but smaller amount local. It's mostly national advertising. Radio, you can see the figures. In the interest of time, I'm going to run quickly on this. Pure play companies, Google, Yahoo, companies that don't have any traditional legacy online media, $9.6 billion. The majority share, 52% of all online advertising. And look at the local share, 32% almost. They are the number 2 player for local online advertising. These are the city guides, and again, Google and Yahoo primarily. Total of about $17 billion. Traditional media companies have done fairly well in terms of the growth. I've highlighted them here in yellow, and I hope you can see that slide fairly well. These are the revenues over the last 4 years, and the right-hand column, farthest right, is the compound average growth, annual growth. And they're ranging from, for instance, the New York Times, 25% increase year to year to year in online revenue. Some others, like McClatchy, 35%. Lee Enterprises, 45%. Media General started a little bit low, 63%. So the amount of revenue that's climbing here for these media companies is fantastic, almost geometric rates. So we're doing very well in terms of the growth. And what's propelling that to a large degree is, of course, the increase in advertising spend nationally. But there's an odd thing going on between local and national here. All advertising in all media,